be moving faster. So there is an opportunity in SME, and I think it's really of the APIs, the partnership APIs, and the open APIs for the case of the MNOs. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Roselyn. You make a very strong case for partnerships in this space. I'd like to come over to you, Chris, because I know within the UNCDF space, I see you tying up a lot of partnerships. You were recently at NITA-U having discussions with them. I've seen you active within the FITSPA landscape. Kindly share with us your perspective around why you see the ecosystem heading from a partnership point of view and your role as a development partner.
Thank you so much, Silva. I hope everybody can hear me. And many thanks to FITSPA for this forum. Indeed, UNCDF is working with various partners in the public and private sector to implement a strategy on leaving no one behind in the digital era. Because indeed, you know, in a time like this, when we are all using some digital platform of some sort, either to share information, to access education, to access finance, it is a digital era. And yet there are several who are in danger of being left behind. But at UNCDF, we see ourselves as really a catalyst. You know, we as a UN agency see ourselves simply as playing the role to unlock various constraints and allow various market actors to take on the challenges that exist in the market. So, Silva, you're right. We have been working very closely with various partners on either, you know, on developing new regulation, on addressing challenges around data privacy and protection, such with NITA, on advancing inclusive innovation as we do when we work with FITSPA and other industry associations. The idea really is to serve as a catalyst to unlock various constraints so that these different stakeholders can take up the mantle. They can continue to do the work that they're already doing so well. So I think that if you look at our communities, if you look at rural farmers, if you look at women and youth and refugees, you know, these are integral members of our society. And yet, as we use technology to improve our productivity and well-being, there's the danger that we might leave these communities behind. And so sometimes it is in making a business case for, you know, inclusion in a refugee community or extending a service to rural farmers. It's making that business case and showing the mobile network operator or the financial services providers, indeed, there's good business to be had. And so through open API initiatives, for example, a fintech is able to extend a service that a bank might not be able to extend, because maybe a bank or an MNO is not, for them, it doesn't make financial sense at that point. But a fintech can take an API and extend a service to that rural community. And by accessing the API of the service provider, is able to extend services to that community. The fintech in question would be innovating and would be creating a new business model, creating new jobs. And so everybody in this equation stands to benefit. I think, you know, in this forum, we're also talking about big data. So let me just touch on it very briefly. That many times when we access various services, including financial services, we do so by providing either collateral or by presenting paperwork that identifies us. But for many of these underserved communities, this is not a luxury that can be afforded. And so big data, analysis of big data allows us sometimes to assess the creditworthiness of different communities, of different members within these communities who might not be able to present land titles or other types of collateral, to find out, are they creditworthy? Are they able to, should we lend them money? Should we extend them services? Big data also can be leveraged to understand emerging trends within these different communities. What are those needs that are coming up that we might not already be addressing, in order to make sure that indeed we do not leave anyone behind in this digital era? So let me stop there for a second. But those are my thoughts, and that's why UNCDF is working so hard to build these partnerships, and that's where we see opportunities for big data, for open APIs, and for the various stakeholders that we are working with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Interesting submission there. Ali, I'd like to come to you, because when we are talking of open systems and open integrated APIs in this kind of space, we know that whereas countries may have geographical limitations and borders, but innovation is borderless. So we would like to tap into your perspective from a cross-border perspective, basing on the morning session we had with the regulators in the room. We also have a regulator in this room. What are you seeing from a best practice point of perspective? How can we foster these regulatory collaborations so that we smoothen ease of doing business and also reduce on compliance costs?
So, you know, the old adage that we have all gotten used to, that says that innovation always moves faster than regulation. Unfortunately, the point of the matter is that more often than not, you have a number of issues that you have to deal with. The first one is that most innovators don't spend enough time understanding the policy environment, the policy and regulatory environment. Number two, on the other side, regulators, up to now at least, are more focused on protecting consumers as opposed to looking at regulation from a bigger perspective, where you are speaking towards improving and enhancing the ecosystem that you're regulating in. Now, I don't think there's a right or wrong situation here. There is a situation where we all must work together. Innovators must understand the role of regulators. Regulators must understand that more often than not, these innovators are young, hungry for business entrepreneurs who may not necessarily know better when it comes to regulation as pertains to innovation. And this is why associations like the Fintech Association in Uganda, the association in Kenya, is trying to bridge this gap. One thing that we are becoming more and more clear about today is that as we move very fast to innovate and to get more people and more Africans into the formal financial services ecosystem, we must look at innovation holistically. Regulators and policymakers must also come to the table. Innovators must come to the table. Unfortunately, what you have today is balkanization of innovation. And what do I mean by balkanization of innovation? It used to be that innovation was borderless. Not anymore. Even the internet has been balkanized to the extent that the way you see and experience the internet in certain countries is different to the way you see and experience the internet in certain countries. Now, if the internet, which is really the core of why innovation has sort of spread like wildfire across the world, is now being sort of caged into our usual geographical parameters, then you can imagine what this does to the general, innovation spread across, across the world. What is the solution to this?
Ali, sorry, Ali. I'll just intervene in there. I think we can just pack a bit of the solutions space for the parting shots. I see we are quite limited for time. Just do one other round as we welcome questions from the online audience. So I'd like to come to you, Arnold, because I think you might have some responses to make, especially regarding that balance between, we've seen now a new Data Protection Act, we've seen the regulations. How are we trying to balance that consumer protection mandate with supporting innovation?
Thank you very much. I think it is a misconception for anyone that thinks that regulations, laws are aimed at inhibiting. And like Ali said, it's just that it's always a catch-up because the laws are usually specific and you cannot create laws for something that is not there. So every time there is a development or an innovation and it appears unregulated and there is a gap that is realized and some pieces of legislation are put in place to try and harmonize the way things are done in that area, people think that actually it's a bad thing, but it's always good because like you are saying, there are aspects like consumer protection. We have people that are consuming technology or services, but if there are actually no laws, then they will actually suffer because of lack of a mechanism of addressing some of their concerns. We do have an office under the Directorate of Regulations and Legal Services, which is responsible for protecting consumers of IT services. And there is something that needs to be understood, of course, is that there are things that we might actually want to use as to present as concerns and complaints, yet the law actually does not allow. So it's always good for people to familiarize themselves with the laws so that they can understand whether they have a genuine consumer complaint or there isn't one. But there is an office that helps protect consumers of those services. The Uganda Communications Commission also has one where it addresses concerns of consumers of telecommunication services. So there are various places where we have these offices, and the public should be aware and interested and go get served in the event that they have any concern that comes from the service consumed.
All right. I think this is where Chris comes in terms of the work you've been trying to do as ecosystem facilitators and things. What more can we expect from you, Chris, if you'd sort of cast for us a futuristic perspective in terms of your partnership efforts?
Thank you so much, Silva. I think what can be expected, what we hope to achieve is that, we've been implementing this program in what we call a market systems development approach, that once you address constraints in the market, that indeed stakeholders will take up the challenges. And what we hope to see is a rise in innovation. We hope to see a rise in policies and regulations that are making it easier for underserved communities to access and use digital technologies to improve their well-being. We also hope to see a rise in skills. That right now we still see various places where people have access to mobile money, people have access to agency banking, but they rely on others to help them consume these services. There's a lack of confidence, there's a lack of knowledge. So we hope to see a rise in those things. And we hope to see that these are solutions that are being provided by local stakeholders, by local players, that there's capacity built. And that is what we consider as success, that there's improved investment in these areas. Even when we see competition, we see that as a good thing, because if one partner develops a solution and then somebody else develops another solution to compete, it means that there's value being seen in the market. It means that somebody sees money to be made. So for us, we hope to see these indications in the ecosystem, in the market, and that's when we can say, all right, I think we are being successful. And based on what we're seeing right now, these are some of the things you can look forward to. We believe we're on track. And we hope that indeed we can build an inclusive digital economy going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I can tell you that from a lawyer's perspective, you're speaking all the right things, because we've been told that wherever 2 or 3 are gathered sharing money, you'll find a lawyer in their midst. So I think, and since you talk about innovation and market development, Roselyn, I know you're very particularly interested around trade finance and the role of blockchain technologies and further leveraging of even mega data beyond big data aspects. From your perspective as a banker, what do you see as some of the landmark issues we can take forward in terms of opportunities in this space?
All right, thank you. I'll just take a step back to my initial submission, and I'll start with the SMEs, because the SMEs are the ultimate downstream to trade finance or to trade. So what I see as the landmark, again, to emphasize, is for the fintechs, now that we have the NPSA in place, to see how we can now innovate further for the SMEs, because like I mentioned, we've done a lot on the consumer. How do we now build that bridge and also get our SMEs well digitized or innovated for, so that they too can now grow at the same level as the inclusion that we are seeing in the consumer space. Off to trade finance and blockchain, of course. Uganda being a typical importing country, and with what we saw when the COVID came, there was a lot of disruption in the supply chain on trade. So if we can see some blockchain innovations that are already happening in the other countries, smart contracts, so that we have our traders receiving their goods much faster, more efficiently, and of course spending less. Every time you digitize, there is less money to be spent during the transaction. I think for me that will be one of the big landmarks in trade finance. And of course, eventually, the SMEs tapping into the efficient trade. Thank you.
And no, if I might probe you further, from sort of a bird's eye perspective in terms of B2B businesses and that ecosystem where a big chunk of the segmented value is, where do you think like typical fintech startups should be looking if they're looking at playing in this space particularly? Like the large e-money issuers to the medium cap tables. Okay.
Speaking of B2B, it is just look at it the way we see the typical e-commerce, where it's now B2C. Consumers are able to go online and access goods and pay. B2B would be the other way around now. When I have a big anchor, a big supplier, being able to supply to maybe a stockist or a hotel if they are buying goods, to be able to buy their goods online and pay for the goods and they are delivered online. So that would be your typical B2B opportunity for the fintechs to digitize. And really it would come off the existing platforms. It's your typical e-commerce that we already have in most cases, except that because now the monies that are going to exchange hands are bigger, it goes beyond mobile money. We are now talking about the open APIs that John was talking about, how they are able to tap into that and are able to make their payments in real time, and the payments are going through the financial services, that is the banks. So that is the typical opportunity that I see in the real time, in the near time.
All right, thanks, Roselyn. Ali, I'm sorry I cut you short in your first pitch, but you are moving to the juicier part where you're talking about the solutions that can be available. It would be injustice on my part to host an international guest and I only give them 2 minutes to speak. So I think you can move on onto the solutions perspective.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. The solution is only one. I think, and the solution is something that is very African, and that we seem to really have forgotten. And the solution is for us to sit together and continuously have conversations and ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Why is the regulator doing this? How can we meet halfway to ensure that we, number one, protect consumers, number two, grow the technology ecosystem, and number four, and number three, to ensure that the technology ecosystem plays its rightful place in growing not just the economy of our countries, but the whole socio-economic space. When we talk and we find commonalities, we quickly realize that we are not adversaries. So I urge everyone, regulators, entrepreneurs, policymakers, to be able to have the presence of mind to understand and appreciate that we all want the same thing. The minute we have that conversation, you find that all our problems start going up. This is not a solution about technology. This is a solution about us listening to each other. That's all the solution I can give today, sir.
Ali, just also as a follow-up, what's your view on, you talk from a very sort of Pan-African perspective. I'm just curious to hear about your view regarding digital trade opportunities under the Continental Free Trade Agreement that's been signed and things like that. Do you see us singing from the same hymn sheet regarding opportunities arising from big data, open APIs, and also making our systems more robust? Do you see that kind of depth that you'd have anticipated from such a continental perspective?
So it's early days. It's very early days. But allow me to respond a little bit more succinctly by quoting something that we Kenyans love to say in Kiswahili. Down in Nairobi, there is a saying that we like to use quite a bit. Vitu kwa ground ni different, which basically means that things on the ground are different. So it's great that policymakers at the continental level are working very hard to ensure that we have policies for digital trade, for free trade across Africa. So I understand we have close to 40 countries that have now signed the free trade agreement, and that's super great. The proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating. How do we translate that on the ground at the national level? If we are still fighting among ourselves within the East African community, what can we trade? What can we send to Uganda? What can Ugandans send to Kenya? What Tanzanians can do? You see, what happens more often than not is that citizens of trading countries are always moving faster than governments. What can governments do to ensure that we are in tandem with our people? Again, it boils down to what I said before. Policies are great, but how are they implemented on the ground? So let me just reiterate what I said. Vitu kwa ground, be different. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks, Ali. John, Mark, I'm coming to you. I realize your you're one of our premium sponsors. So I think this might be dear to you in terms of from an infrastructure perspective. Probably you have some of the largest partnerships in the ecosystem. I mean, you own the table on which almost everyone else is playing. But we've seen issues like the pandemic, COVID, sort of requiring for a new approach to business continuity. So in terms of entities that might be in the room and they want to partner with you from maybe a business continuity perspective, making our systems more secure and robust, what kind of tips can you share so that they can be aware as they develop these kinds of solutions aimed at market leaders like yourselves?
Yeah, thank you for that question. One, business continuity in its own self is a big topic. But before I can address it, I would want to look at the angle of what we do to ensure that the ecosystem can be as efficient as possible. So the topic that we've been articulating, open APIs and open data, we need to understand that one of the reasons why we do open APIs is to reduce time to value. Time to value in this case is if someone needed to do something today, let them not wait an extra year to get it done because of technology limitations. So the open APIs and open data are intended for us to reduce time to value for the whole ecosystem. So whoever is coming to MTN in this case, we try to ensure that where you could have taken months or a year to get things done, we provide open APIs, and then you are able to reduce your time to value. Now, in relation to the broader topic of business continuity, every business has a context to say, based on your scale. For instance, you could be a startup, you could be an SME, you could be a corporate, just like MTN. Now, given your context and the criticality of what you do, you may have a given level of risk appetite. For instance, your risk appetite for service being down as MTN can be close to zero, to say my service for fintech, mobile money shouldn't be down, at least unplanned down. So your risk appetite can be zero. Now, if your risk appetite is zero, it literally translates to what are you going to do within your systems to ensure that you achieve, say, a 999. 999 in this case is what we say 9.999% availability of your service. So you architect your systems in such a way that you build in high availability within the platforms, you build in redundancy, you have disaster recovery systems, you have a tested business continuity plan, you have a process and a framework under which this is done. Now, depending on your scale, one of the things that could happen within your hosting options could be, are you using a cloud, for instance? Are you using a local data center? What does the local data center provide you? Of course, many times because of regulation, we are going to start with many fintechs are having to do a lot of hosting of their services within infrastructure that is provided by providers like MTN within the country, because they may have limitations on what they can share outside the country. Now, if you are using local infrastructure, perfectly fine. Be keen to know, does this infrastructure that I'm using locally enable me to achieve the minimal risk that my risk appetite can live with? If your risk appetite is 999, 49s, 39s, 99.5, then you model your architecture, you model your infrastructure deployment in a way that it gives you the right level of redundancy, the right level of availability to achieve the service levels that you require. So typically that's how everyone should look at it. But you're going to have a different measure for SMEs, a different measure for corporates. Now, again, the other thing that I think Arnold also touched base was about the risk-based approach. Now, as an ecosystem, when we look at what we do, the services we deliver, and how we deliver them, you will find that the risk, for instance, for a fintech that is only doing mobile money services is not the same risk for a fintech that is doing card-based services. Now, in that case, you find that as you use a risk-based approach, there are frameworks that guide onto this. You'll be able to know that for this kind of a fintech, maybe you need a PCI DSS certification. If you are at that level where you're handling card information, of course, our colleagues from the banking system know these kind of things. If you are a fintech who is supposed to be not holding wallets, who is just collecting payments, maybe the framework will define something lighter for you. So part of the things that would come in within these kinds of engagement, and which we've also discussed with the association, FITSPA, is to say we need to have a community that discusses risk, but also in this discussion, they look at the different players, not within one bucket, but they can be able to say the risk that applies for someone doing saving, lending, insurance, wealth management, or payment is all going to be categorized differently. And then their requirements, even from a regulatory mandate, would be proportionate to what they're doing. So this is something that we need to be cognizant of as an industry. That's my submission for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. We have 5 minutes to bring this to a close. I think we will just be moving to our closing shots. But I think I have 2 questions from the online audience. I think one probably is tailored to Chris, and another I think I'll give it to you, Arnold. So I think let's start with Chris. There is a question here. That says, what's your say about fintechs in Uganda starting up a fintech hub? So I think this is more geared towards partnership. You can answer that and give your parting shots, and then we come to Arnold.
Thank you so much. So the question is, what do I think about fintechs in Uganda starting up a hub? Is that the question?
Yes, I think.
I'm hoping I understand it clearly, because I think if you look at FITSPA, for example, I mean, you have an industry association right there that's bringing fintechs together. And so, you know, that's a platform where fintechs can come together and collaborate. And for us, as I mentioned, you know, we see that as an association like that, or under these different platforms for fintechs coming together, we see opportunities for greater collaboration, greater innovation, and also solutions that can reach more communities that are in danger of being left behind. And let's be clear, there is good business to be done serving all members of our communities. Sometimes it's just a question of finding the right business model, the right service offering. And so I'm really glad to have this platform where we're talking about open APIs, where we're talking about big data, because these are some of the opportunities that are yet untapped. This is some of the potential that hasn't been leveraged enough yet. And so I think for me, as we come to a close here today, it's really it's a call to action for fintechs, for various players out there, and of course our audience online, to take up this challenge and be innovative. Let's create these partnerships and have these APIs that are now being opened up by MNOs, by banks, to extend solutions and get creative. Let's take into account the underserved communities and their lack of digital knowledge sometimes, or their lack of devices, opportunities to protect their privacy and data and provide good services. So for me, I see lots of opportunity, and I'm glad that we have potential. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Chris. I think, Arnold, the question I have here is, what could you point out as some of the enabling features in our regulatory framework now? that support interconnection, interoperability, and some cross-border operations. Specifically, this was tailored to trade and remittances, but I think you can tailor broadly, and maybe Roselyn can talk more about trade and remittances and her closing remarks.
Thank you very much. In the environment, we do have what we call the enterprise architecture and interoperability framework, which as well comes together with the enterprise security architecture. Now, these were created to enable people to build systems that can talk to each other, to build systems that can easily exchange processes, exchange data, for the sake of serving people better. And we as well have another initiative that we are doing around that, which is the integration platform, which is actually connecting very many systems which traditionally were not talking to each other, but now they do, for the sake of availing that data for innovators, availing some of the services and processes for people to benefit by consuming services that are owned by more than one institution. So we have a bit of that, but of course, moving forward, what is going to help is going to be the building of systems while following the enterprise architecture and interoperability framework.
No, I'll just ask you a bit more if you have any updates on the integration policy, because I'm aware the ministry was working on it. Is it still in the works?
Yes, the ministry is handling that, the open data policy. It's at the ministry level. Okay.
Are you comfortable sharing a bit more in terms maybe of some of the key aspects that we should be looking forward to in terms of the big data policy? Because the idea is that government is one of the largest data collectors, and so some of those data sets might also be useful for the private sector as well. I mean, issues around taxation, for instance, e-government platforms, but also government is integrating with private sector in terms of payments and things like that.
Okay, thank you very much. The integration platform that I've talked about is being built following the open data policy, and its objective is to avail data or to make data accessible by those that need it. Now, it is in advanced stages, and we've connected a couple of institutions, including URA, Ministry of Lands, URSB, amongst others. And the conversation is now clear that this is going to be accessible to the general public, because at the moment it's clear how government institutions do access, but now it is clear that it's going to be available to the public innovators, amongst others. The question that is currently being discussed is the challenges that are associated with the access restrictions, where, for example, if you wanted to do a search of land, there is a fee that you're entitled to pay. So now issues to do with access are the ones that we are ironing out with various owners of that data. But of course, the intention is to have it readily and easily accessible to innovators.
Thank you. And Roselyn, I mean, some deeper insight on the trade and remittances aspects from your commercial perspective.
Thank you. So I think I'll take that from a banking angle. Yes, indeed, one of the things that will stimulate growth when it comes to innovation is if we manage to digitize the trade and remittances cross-border. Of course, there are things that are already in place that we are trying to leverage, and plus the non-trade barriers that you talked about. But as it were right now, it is one of the things that are impeding our growth much faster on trade, the cross-border. So looking forward to the regulations coming out and the support from NITA. But Silva, just to give my parting shots, I'll start by the one reason why I'm so passionate about SMEs when it comes to innovation, because we have left them behind. But of course, I'm cognizant that this is just a journey. We have to start somewhere. So we have to recognize that SMEs are the cement of inclusive and sustainability in a society. So even if we innovate at the corporate level or at the bottom where we have the consumers and we leave them in the middle, the other two will not come together. So in line with our topic today, open APIs and data, I think it's an opportunity for our fintech partners and of course all of us in the chain to look at how we use the open APIs to quickly innovate for the SMEs and get them into the foray, and they're able to do their business much faster. From a big data and open data perspective, that for me speaks to lending to SMEs because most of them really need access to financing. And the only way we can lend to them comfortably is if we have data that is able to predict the performance of an SME. And for us to do that, we should be able to partner with the fintechs that can come up, that have access to this data, of course, through NIRA. And we are able to almost be 999, if I may copy John's word, that this person will be able to pay back. So, yeah, my parting shows big opportunity in the SME sector. If the fintechs and all the other partners can digitize and innovate with them, then we should be see growth coming through faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Roselyn. Ali, I'll come to you, and then Arnold can close. I realized I interrupted him, and he didn't close so well, but there is a question here around national development, facilitating national development while being cognizant of social concerns like privacy. This guy gives an example of the credit scoring algorithms they're doing in partnership with driver data and aspects like that. So I think the question is around privacy concerns of mass data collection. And then there is another question here, which I think for John Mark, also as he closes, around measures being taken regarding managing risks from third-party service providers, e.g. integrators, aggregators, and regarding to open APIs. So I think we go with Ali, then John Mark can come in with that question around third-party risk management. And then our friend Arnold can close with privacy concerns of mass data.
There are obvious and endemic risks around the data economy and around the data industry. The fact of the matter is that most of us still don't appreciate the concerns that people have and the inherent risks, not just for people who are sharing their personal data, but for organizations that do not have what I call a privacy first mantra to their business models. I think just recently, most of the big technology companies in the world have been fined humongous amounts of money for data privacy breaches. I can assure you one thing. We are in very early days when it comes to data privacy issues, but it's going to be a major concern going forward, especially within the African context. In Kenya, we now have the Data Protection Commissioner, who is already hitting the ground running, and she has already issued some very interesting letters and warnings to a number of organizations. What I would advise people as far as data is concerned is you must understand what you're dealing with. So let me give you a scenario. When you are operating or in social media, you have to understand the basics about social media. And you must also understand the fact that these platforms are a double-edged sword. They are great for business, they are great for, for connecting with people, but you must be very careful what information you're sharing. You must also be very careful to ensure that you have the right privacy settings in place. And I guess it's not the forum to discuss the privacy setting, but do not use platforms that you have not drilled deep into these platforms to really understand. Facebook has been great for a lot of people, LinkedIn, Twitter, and the rest of these social media platforms. But it's also a double-edged sword.
Thanks, Sally. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, great summary there. John Mark, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. As I close, two things to address the question. But before I address it, I think there was a very important submission from Roselyn in her last remarks about SMEs. Personally, for instance, I get a little bit happy when I see a panelist like from the bank talking about the support for the SMEs to get into this space. Having banked with us Unchat for a couple of years, I've been asking myself, what are the bank's views in ensuring that the system of SMEs can be more robust? We as an ecosystem, and even when you look at it from an MTM perspective, we look at SMEs as a core component within the ecosystem. So we do consumer, yes, we do corporate services, but we have to have a targeted approach and support for SMEs. Now, this still ties down into your question, the question I think from the team around the partners that are connecting to us. What are we putting in place? Now, what we're putting in place, I would look at it two ways. I would say, when you look at security, it's not one dimension. It's both all ends. So our platforms, we try to ensure that they're as secure as possible using different frameworks that are verified, internationally verified, to be right frameworks to work with. But still, you have an ecosystem. So we don't stand alone. We stand in an ecosystem of different players connecting to us. And many of these players are actually the segment of SMEs. Now, what we do is, at our level, we put in place lean but secure integration. Lean in a sense that an SME doesn't have to buy maybe very special technology to integrate to us. But why they don't buy very special technology to integrate to us, still we don't compromise to say, you need to ensure that your connection to us is authenticated in the right way. You're using encryption, you're using mutual TLS, you're using Auth 2.0. We try to make sure that you achieve the minimum to connect to us. Now, as an ecosystem, the kind of approach that we are having is sensitization. We need to ensure that everyone that is within this ecosystem is sensitized on the risks within where we play within the fintech ecosystem, such that while I may give you a secure connection, if your platform is compromised, then literally someone can get your credentials within your platform, then act like you and connect to me. Now, on my side, I will be seeing you as a right authentication, a right connection, but because someone compromised your system. So as an ecosystem, we try to do sensitization to ensure that all the people that connect to us understand that if they're insecure, we are impacted. If we are impacted, they are impacted. So it's not one way, it's two ways. We try to educate them. We try to give them the right recommendations to connect to us. And literally, we try to uplift the security of the ecosystem. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Arnold, close.
Thank you very much. Because we're pressed for time, I'll answer it this way. One, the Data Protection and Privacy Act was enacted following a provision in the Constitution, which is Article 27, that is the right to privacy. Now, all people that collect, process, and store personal identifying data are supposed to be subjected to the requirements in that act, as well as the attendant regulations. And to ensure compliance, the Office of National Data Protection was set up, and it's operational, and it's supposed to hold anyone responsible for misuse or abuse of any data that they collect from people. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Arnold. Thank you to our online audience and those who've been following. It's exactly 12:05, and I'd like to bring this to a close. I hand you over to the FITSPA team for continued programming. I remain Silva Kayondo. Thank you.